connect with Lafayette College. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, please know that we have utilized the audience mute feature in order to ensure that the presentation is not interrupted by any background noise. We welcome questions, and we ask that you use the chat feature below at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions, and Professor Mattison will review those questions at the end of the presentation. Secondly, please know that the presentation is going to be recorded, and the rest of the Lafayette community will have access to it later. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. So thank you very much, Professor Mattison. Dr. Robert S. Mattison, the Marshall R. Metzgar Professor of Art History, has taught at Lafayette College for 39 years. He was the first person to teach modern art history, contemporary art history, and the history of architecture at Lafayette. He has published 8 books, 102 articles on modern art and architecture. His most recent monograph on sculptor Ronald Bladen came out in November. His piece of Black Lightning is in front of the Williams Art Center. And Dr. Mattison is currently working on a catalog of the works of Franz Klein. So without further ado, Professor Mattison.
Great. Well, I'm so delighted to be here. And I want to, first of all, thank Amy and her team for making this possible, and to thank all of you for being here. It's a difficult time in the world, but maybe this provides some sort of escape, and also tells us something about the accomplishments of the college over the last 150 years, culturally, in terms of its architecture, and something of American accomplishments too. So to get going with this, let's go here and see how this works. Oh, I'm trying to get the first slide. Why is this not going? Technology. Trying to make this advance and it's not doing it, Amy?
Just try to click down with your keyboard.
Clicking up, clicking down.
How about your mouse?
Okay. There we go. Okay, good. We had a keyboard before. Okay, so anyway, just working out the technology. Yeah, so the way this all started was that, you know, one of my great loves, in addition to modern and contemporary art, is architecture. And as Amy said, I've been teaching for 39 years here. When I started out with the architecture, you know, I was taking students to New York and taking them to Philadelphia and taking them overseas, but I wasn't teaching Lafayette architecture. And a couple of years, it occurred to me that this was really foolish, that we had some very great buildings on campus and buildings that we should pay attention to and work with the students on. As a result of part of that, I did a little catalog on the architecture in the 1990s. So this is the first time working with Zoom. If I've done conferences, first time with a lecture, so you all please pray with me. We're all gonna, we'll do okay. So anyway, and I should say also we have an architecture minor program here, which has turned out a lot of people who've gone into the profession, also in the building trades, or others who just have an interest in architecture. So what we're doing here is we're looking at an aerial view of the campus and seeing a number of buildings we're going to look at. But I think one of the things I wanted to start with is the campus itself, and that is that, let me just say before that maybe that, you know, what characterizes Lafayette is the difference in its buildings. There's a series of vignettes. There are other colleges around the country that have had a single style, or at least in their origins. You think of the University of Pennsylvania, Gothic Revival, Princeton, Gothic Revival, Yale too at its core. But instead what we have is a kind of potpourri of buildings. And what this allows us to do is look at a history of culture from a particular viewpoint, from architecture, and with these very buildings. So it provides a great opportunity. Looking down at the campus, one of the key relatively early figures in the architecture was Frederick Law Olmsted. So Lafayette originally was facing down the hill, looking towards Easton at the upper right in your screen, in the upper left in your screen. When you look at Party Hall here, you're actually looking at the back of Party Hall, the the facade of it faces down the hill. And in 1909, we brought the Frederick Law Olmsted's firm here. Olmsted is the most famous landscape designer in American history. The suggestion was to reorient the college away from lining up down the hill around this central space, the campus. And of course, a campus, what it means is a field. And this is really distinctive in American college and university design. I know you've all spent time in Europe, and if you're at the Sorbonne, you're at the Louvre or Oxford University, they're organized around quadrangles, organized around urban squares. It's an American idea to organize it around this open field. And what it has to do is it has to do with the communal sense of learning that's part of the American agenda, and also with our connection with nature. You know, in the 19th century, when we were defining ourselves, what was said was, well, Europe had the cities, it had the history. What we had was nature. We were the new Eden, the new paradise. The Hudson River was called a nave. And so this idea of connecting the educational experience with the natural world is something you find in American colleges and universities. You do not find so much in Europe, and it's distinctive with this college. So that's very much a part of what we're doing here and part of this college. And so, you know, for another open park in the center of an area, that's of course Central Park. Frederick Law Olmsted began with Central Park, worked on that 20 years. Prospect Park in Brooklyn, the Emerald Necklace in Boston, the Buffalo Park system, the Cleveland Park system, all belong to the Frederick Law Olmsted firm. And we are part of that at Lafayette College. So, Pardee Hall. Pardee is really the oldest of our buildings. It's intact. South College is older, but it's so embedded in other buildings, it's hard to separate it out. Pardee was originally designed in 1872. It was designed by a noted architect, John MacArthur Jr. He designed City Hall in Philadelphia, and he basically brought to this country what is called the Second Empire style. City Hall being the first of the examples in this country and the largest. What that was about was the style generally was based on France, and it was because between 1850 and 1870, the eyes of the world were on Paris as it was being redesigned by the Emperor Louis Napoleon and Baron Haussmann to turn it into a modern commercial and cultural city. And so this makes perfect sense for us as being Lafayette College with our French connection to make that connecting link. So what this style features, it comes really out of the 17th century initially in the French chateaux of that period in the palais, is a longitudinal architecture, long and spread out. The architecture is modulated by a central pavilion and then two pavilions at the corners, which is exactly what you see going on here. The building evinces a sense of really a monumentality, of authority, and even a bit of austerity in the way that it's designed. It was said to be one of the largest college buildings at the time that it was executed. The segmental arches emphasize the thickness of the walls. The colonnaded entrance is grand, and you have at the top mansard roof. So this was again very French. Lafayette connection. This kind of double-pitched roof was designed by Francois Mansart in the 17th century and became notable for French architecture. Well, you can talk about Paris during 1850 to 1870, but really I think part of what this really goes back to even more is back to original French 17th century architecture. So here's the Luxembourg Palace by Salomon de Brosse, done 1714 to 24, and it is this sort of connection that is being made by the architect, by John MacArthur, for Lafayette's building. And I have to say that this, you know, I think this makes sense to all of us who have seen these buildings, but the fun thing I do with the students is, well, this would be a building that they looked at 4 weeks ago in class, and then there'd be a building to look at 2 weeks ago, and all of a sudden you begin to see how this local architecture builds into a world tradition. So there's the Luxembourg. So moving along, Hogue Hall. Great number of colleges and universities in this country are dominated by Gothic revival. Lafayette isn't. We've got the one Gothic Revival building. There are three sort of Gothic revivals in this country, one in 1820, one in 1840, and one around 1900. So this comes in the third of those revivals. So why Gothic Revival? Well, to say the styles, continued. There was several different events of this going on. European cathedrals were being rebuilt. But I tell the students, it's the idea we have of the students that they lead a monk-like existence, right? Studying all the time and then going back to their quiet cells and doing nothing but focusing on their studies. And then they all laugh. And so that's becomes part of this. So what makes this building Gothic Revival? Well, it's got the irregular stone coursing, for instance. That's not, we could certainly at this time in history lay perfectly even coursings of stone. In fact, it's much harder to build like this, but it looks older than it really is. The building has a steeply pitched roof. It has a slightly pointed arch for the entrance. It has trefoil stained glass windows that are done with that three-lobe pattern to your right, the trefoil design. Even the notch at the top of the main gable roof across it comes out of Gothic. And to the far right, what it has is it has a flying buttress. It has a buttress attached. You don't need that for the building. It's a sort of nod to Gothic. And even if you can see to that side, the drain spout that's up above is a miniature recreation of the famous dragon drain spouts at Notre Dame. And so all of this speaks to this. The building looks more like a Gothic meeting house than a Gothic church. It was used, I should say, at this point, it was originally founded for the Brainerd Society, which is an evangelical society. During this time, it was used as both a social meeting place for the students and for this evangelical society. And also that it was built by Charles Bolton, who was a Lafayette graduate in 1880 and an architect from our school. So all this ties into the Gothic sensibility. My own thought is the reason this is done more like a meeting house than a church as well. It's used for social activities as well, and also because our connection, our tentative connection at Lafayette is to the Low Church, the Presbyterian Church, rather than the High Church, either Anglican or Catholic. And so sort of meeting house design is more appropriate. But certainly this fits into the Gothic tradition. And there's one, it's full of gargoyles all over it. There's a Lafayette student dressed in his academic robes and beanies, which I understand they were required to wear when they were freshmen, pulling out the Lafayette symbol, maybe looking like a book that he's opening in front of him. So Van Wickle Hall. The Hogue Hall dates to 1901. Slightly earlier is Van Wickle Hall. Van Wickle was our original library, our first library building. Before that, South College and areas of Pardee were used to house books. The style of this building is Romanesque Revival. And Romanesque Revival was one of the really popular traditions in America in the post-Civil War period. The building was built by John MacArthur Harris, who was the nephew of John MacArthur Jr., who designed Pardee Hall. The building was paid for by Van Wickle, who was the son-in-law of Ariel Pardee, Aristotle Van Wickle, who was the son-in-law of Ariel Pardee, who commissioned Pardee Hall. So you got this connection, father and son-in-law, and then uncle and nephew in the architecture. The Romanesque Revival was a reaction against Gothic and was a reaction to the post-Civil War era and the industrial era. It was a return to a more historical and to an architecture that had an earthy fundamental quality about it. It was premiered, that style was premiered by Henry Hobson Richardson. He was the first American architect to have an international reputation. Richardson had gone to Europe during the Civil War to escape conscription. And what he'd done is he'd gone to southern France and he'd seen the buildings of southern France were built around 1000 AD, the great cathedrals on Saint-Sernin, Toulouse, Magdalen, Vézelay, Saint-Foy, and Conques. and absorbed that style and brought it back to America as a sign of sort of security in the post-Civil War period. So what does this building feature? Well, it features this earthy brown color done in Pompeian brick, this red-brown Pompeian brick. It sits low to the ground. It's very solid. It's got a great large continuous roof line. It's got this round arch now, almost cave-like entrance. So it speaks of the security of a kind of fundamental connection also with nature and the earth, which people wanted after the Civil War. Building also tells you very much what it's about. It's got the cross gable at the entrance, which marks, of course, the entrance area. And then the stacks of the area are spread out left to right. And of course, book stacks run horizontally. So these ribbon windows, which run left to right, tell us about the function of the building. So it's something that really embodies the Romanesque revival style in America. And Harris is really a follower of Henry Hobson Richardson. And just to show you here, this is the Ames Library in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is one of Richardson's building. I mean, his largest, most famous building is Trinity Church in Copley Square in Boston. But he built these libraries, which were the center of communities all throughout New England. If you live in a New England town, you very well might well have a Henry Hobson Richardson building in the town. Richardson buildings tend to be a little bit ruggeder. He embed rough and stone in the wall, but I think you can see the connecting link, that round arched entrance, the low single roof line to Van Wickle Hall. Richardson also typically broke his roof line with what are called eyebrow dormers. Van Wickle Hall used to have these, and they took them out in one of the renovations. I've always wanted them back, so if any of you feel like making a donation, you can make it to the restoring the eyebrow dormers. We'll call them the Mattison eyebrow dormers in Van Wickle Hall. So that's Richardson. Quincy's great, by the way. If you don't go, it has home. There's two presidents in it. Both Adams' homes are there, of course, and it has this beautiful little building. So sort of continuing with this related theme, see it's all related, looking at McKelvey House. So what happens is Richardson, the Boston architect, our first internationally known architect, dies early. He dies in 1886. And the reins of his firm, his creativity is basically taken over by three of his assistants, Charles McKim, Samuel Mead, and Sanford White. And they formed the firm McKim, Mead, and White, which was the most popular firm in late 19th century America. And they built all over again the eastern part of this country, major buildings in New York and Boston as well. The Boston Public Library is McKim, Mead, and White. The New York Yacht Club is McKim, Mead, and White. But what you have here is you have McKelvey House. And so this is 1888. And McKim, Mead, and White were brought to commissioned to design this house. These types of buildings were built for individuals who made a great deal of money in the post-Civil War period. They traveled to Europe and they wanted large mansion-like structures that they'd seen in Europe. At the same time, they wanted something that looked American. And so you have the scale that comes out of Europe here. You have the circular pavilion, which comes out of Europe as well. But you have the rough and stonework that is more American. You see some of the major buildings they did were done actually in shingles. Their style is called the stick and shingle style. But then here you got the rough and stone. You've got the pavilion offset to one side, the cross gable roof to the other, kind of irregular chimney placement. So it makes the building look more casual, more American on one hand, and it has a European grandeur on the other. People wanted a combination of those two things, and McKelvey House satisfies that. I'll just show you here. So here's a McKim, Mead, and White house that's in Newport, Rhode Island. The building exemplifies the same kind of style, now done in shingles. This is the Isaac Bell House. That's same year, actually, 1888, same kind of, but done with the shingle exterior. And you can see this. I should also mention that, like McKelvey House here, the veranda or the porch is really an American idea. Europeans have balconies, but this notion of the extended porch, which connects us to nature, under the shade of the architecture, looking out at nature, is a very American thing to do. So it seems like a big jump here, but bear with me. There's a connecting link. We're going to wind back. So what we do is we're jumping forward to the Farranon Center. And Farranon Center was built between 1889 and 1891. It's the student center, so it would replace Hogue Hall, which was always inadequate as a student center. Of course, sits right next to Hogue Hall. It was designed by a Boston firm, Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott. They've done they do a lot of college buildings. They've done a number of buildings on campus. The Kirby Sports Complex is all by them. So they were brought here to design this building, and I think the goal was a couple of goals. One, the building has a very large footprint, to somehow mask that footprint and to bring it into scale with the rest of the campus. Other thing is to make the building design somehow coordinate with the campus, and to make the building comfortable to the students, to take a building of this scale and to make it something that's going to feel comfortable for them. So what do? They pick up again on the rough cut stone, which makes the building look older, of course, than it is. The rough cut stone very much matches Hogue Hall, which is right next door. They pick up on other things like with Hogue Hall, that notch at the top of the gable, the crosset is picked up right out of Hogue. But more than that, what they do is they give the building a kind of casualness by its asymmetry. So it's got a long wing, which extends to our left here. The entrance is offset to the right. You've got a circular pavilion, which is offset further beyond that. They increase the size of the windows, which paradoxically makes the building seem smaller as we try in our mind to bring them in proportion with what we know building window scale is in more domestic architecture. You can't see the chimney here, but the chimney is absolutely enormous, bigger than it has to be for the one fireplace and the cooking and heating. And that too brings the building down to scale. And so all of this makes the building seem more homey, and albeit in a grand sort of way. So now I'm going to try my first of going backwards here, and we'll see how this works. No, it doesn't work. Okay, so, no, I can't. Okay, I can't go backwards. But there we go. Now, this is working. Okay, so here's the thesis I have, that the architecture team was brought to campus, that they're given a tour of campus. Of course, one of the things they go to see is McKelvey House. And it's a Boston firm. I should mention the firm name again, Shepley, Bulfinch, Richardson, and Abbott. They have two of the most prestigious architects in America as their forerunners. One is Charles Bulfinch, who was our first professional architect, who worked on the Capitol in Washington, D.C., built the Capitol building in Boston too. And then H.H. Richardson is tied into the heritage of that firm. So they go to see this McKim, and White building, which comes out of the Richardson tradition. They look at this and say, aha, that's what we want to do with the Farranon Center. So look at the asymmetrical gable here, the round pavilion set off to one side, and you go forward here, and you see it's maybe not the ideal image. I would have wanted something more frontal, but I think that what they did was they picked up on the style of McKim, and White to do the Farranon Center. And that would make sense for them as a Boston firm whose heritage lies in that kind of architecture. So that's one of the references we have here. I think the other references, let's go inside the building. There's an older image of the inside that a lot of you may remember that, well, so what do you have? You have this long longitudinal space. You have a balcony up above that looks down on it. You have a glass roof. This actually shows the earlier furniture, which was kind of electric blue and kind of orangey pink. And it had neon lights on the inside of the building. And so I say to the students, what does this remind you of? And they're pretty quick with all of this. They say, oh, well, it reminds me of a shopping mall. And in fact, I think that's one of the references on the inside of the building. So what the architects are saying is, what are the two places students are really comfortable? Well, one is at home, and the other is in the shopping mall. Remember, this was late 80s, early 90s when shopping mall was a kind of sociological study. So here's a shopping mall. You know, I think that that goes into part of the thinking of this. There's maybe a dose of postmodern humor in what we're seeing there. So, Kirby, Government Law Building. I think the best building on our campus. It's a building that stands out for its formality, for its classical design. The building was commissioned by Fred Morgan Kirby, the sort of the progenitor of the Kirby family, family's been very involved with the college. Fred Morgan Kirby was a young boy, actually, up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. He got together with his friend Sumner Woolworth, and they started the Woolworth and Company chain stores. And students say, "Well, what's that?" And I say, it's like Target or Walmart, but you have to imagine there's only one of them, and it's dominating the entire country. And so anyway, the Kirby made his family fortune that way. And was very interested in Lafayette College. He didn't attend, but generations of Kirbys have afterwards, of course. And the building, you know, what I, of course, teach the students in architecture class is about patronage. It's almost the first thing we discuss, and we continue through that. Maybe only secondary to the architect, and sometimes more important than the architect, is the patron. Architecture is public, it's big, it's expensive, and the person who pays for it is a major force, often in the design of the building. So this building, I think, espouses very much Kirby's values, which have to do with the constitutional system that came out of England to America, and also to the capitalist system, which were both at the core of what he did. And it's worth noting, well, first of all, this building was built, designed and started 1928 to 1929, right in the beginning of the stock market collapse. And so it was designed and conceived and begun to be built during the biggest challenge that capitalism had really faced up to that time. So for this building, what Kirby did was he got probably the most prestigious architects of that particular age. It was a firm of Warren and Wetmore. Less than a decade before, they completed Grand Central Terminal in New York City and Biltmore Hotel and numerous other major buildings around America. The building is built with a limestone exterior and travertine marble on the interior. It's by the way, it's the only one of these earlier college buildings that has the interior intact. The rest of the interior has been gutted for one reason or another, but this is intact. So it's all the finest materials. It was said at the time to be the most expensive college building per square foot in the country. I think that's a hard thing to prove or disprove, but it certainly was very, very elaborate and expensive in that way. The building is done, the style of it is what was then called the Beaux-Arts style. And it comes from the architects, including Warren and Wetmore, who mostly studied in France at the École des Beaux-Arts, and brought back from the École classicism. And the classicism goes back to Greek temples, to Roman temples, to Andrea Palladio in the 16th century, and then up in the 17th century in England, to Inigo Jones and Christopher Wren. And so this classical tradition, which is thought by some, and it's a much more complicated issue than that, to be the core of the Western experience. It's like the great books tradition was very much the core of this building. So the building is built with a central entrance area that functions like a Roman temple. It looks like a Roman temple, complete with a pediment up above. The wings are absolutely balanced on either side. The window design is balanced. It's centralized, it's ordered, it's logical, it's classical in every possible way. The building also features an iconography with it of carving done by Edward McCardle. And it's really quite remarkable. It has the Republic over the door, and go forward here. And then in the pediment up above, it has I'm sorry, I was going to say, well, I'll come back to that. In the pediment up above, what it has is it has law to the left and government to the right, with the eagle in the center. Law has the scales of justice. She has the tablet of Mosaic law. She has the parchments of Roman law. To the right, government has her books on has her hand on books of common law. She has the oak leaves next to her, which are signs of fortitude. She has the bound staves, which the Romans carried into battle. They called fasces, where the word fascism came from. So this is an allegorical program which is being shown to us. The building is a teaching tool. It's teaching us about the history of, well, architecture, of classicism, and of Kirby's particular belief system. Let me just go back for a second. Back to one is the building also contains on this face of it, it contains on the window surrounds Tudor roses for the English system and fleur-de-lis for the French system. And the inscription picked, there's several inscriptions on the building, but this one is from the book of St. Matthew. Is it not lawful for me to do what I will with my own? It makes it seem as even the Bible is supporting capitalism with that particular inscription. I mentioned that this style comes out of several sources. Sorry, it's a rather poor image, but one of them is out of the English classical tradition, which really occurred during the 17th century with Inigo Jones first and then followed by Christopher Wren. The building's actually closest to Wren's Pensioners Library. It's in Chelsea, but I picked this image instead because I love this building. I'm sorry, this is the great banqueting hall in the Whitehall section of London. I'm sorry, it's actually an old image. And the building is now spanking clean, so you have to think of it that way. This building really was the one in 1616. Inigo Jones had come back from Italy and brought classicism to England during this time. And it's a very prestigious building. It's an historical building. It was where the king met, and the king and queen still do meet foreign visitors. It was commissioned by Charles I in honor of his father, James I, the first Scottish king. And of course, Charles was beheaded in 1649 in front of this building. You know, the English king was beheaded during the Cromwellian period. And more than that, I'll just tell you quickly that this is the only building in this area in Whitehall to survive the Great Fire of London. In 1669, you know how it survived? Inigo Jones was now dead, but Christopher Wren had become the architect of the king. And when Wren saw the fire approaching Inigo Jones's great building, he ordered everything around this building dynamited so the fire couldn't get to it. So I tell my students, there's dedication to architecture. So anyway, back to us, back to Kirby Hall. So moving to more contemporary times. What we have is the Williams Art Center, which was finished in 1983. Slides, I'm sorry, the image is a little bit pixelated. But this was to bring modern art and architecture to campus. This is the home of the art and music departments and the theater department all together at that time. The building was built by a Washington firm, Perkins and Will. And what they did was, well, they tried to be in keeping with the campus and doing it in collegiate brick, trying to hold the scale down by having a sunken atrium before it, but obviously its use of glazing of glass, its modern geometry, looks like a modern abstract painting, was to signal that modern art had arrived on the campus. The source for this was, well, the east wing of the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., which was designed by A.M. Pei just a couple of years before. Perkins and Will is a Washington firm. And actually the building, ours looks pretty good, actually. The Pei doesn't look so good in this particular image. But anyway, this clean geometric look to the building, the kind of abstraction is something that is very much picks up in the Art Center. This is the lobby, not of the Williams Art Center, but the east wing of the National Gallery. And you can see relationships to our much smaller lobby. Unfortunately, we didn't get the Calder, the Frank Stellas, the Ellsworth Kellys, big Motherwell that the National Gallery has, but we're still working on that. So, moving forward a little bit more down to the foot of the hill, looking at the Williams Visual Arts Building. And so this building was completed in 2000, so it's a big anniversary coming up this year. Among other things, it's a connecting link to the downtown, and I have to say my colleague Ed Kearns was a major force in moving the college in that direction. The building is designed by Joe Biondo, who worked at that time for Spillman Farmer. Joe now teaches architecture, has his own architectural firm, but teaches architecture with us, and he teaches in the building that he designed, which is really, really nice. What this building was built on the location of a car repair shop and car sales, Hoffman Auto. We'd hoped it would be a sort of a building up from that. It ended up being almost a total tear down. But what Joe brought us was this industrial looking building. And so he does that with the sawtooth, skylights, which face north to the building and let the light in, with the large areas of glazing, with the steel, with the canopy, which consists of steel rods projecting outwards, and with the extensive glazing. And so the point of this being is that artists, ever since mid-20th century, have wanted to work in industrial spaces. And it started with the abstract expressionists, taking over small industrial spaces on 10th Street in the 50s, and then in the 60s, people like Rauschenberg and Johns doing the same thing in Soho, populating those spaces. And this picks up on that sensibility. And in fact, since then, a number of museums have been designed to look like industrial spaces. It's the fact that artists make things, so it's got an industrial quality about it. And philosophically, they want to be seen as both intellectuals and people are makers with their hands. So this building suits very much that sensibility. I should mention also that one of the features of it, because over and over again, is we had with this these clinker bricks, which are they're overly fired bricks. They're fired too hot, so they end up not regularly shaped, but irregularly shaped. And this is well, it could look like an old factory. It was also used by the arts and crafts movement in California, but it gives it that older, more organic look. And the funny thing about this, next time you go to look at it, is when we brought in the brick masons, they were horrified and started to try to make these irregular bricks line up, driving themselves nuts. If you look at the first 4 or 5 rows, this is an attempt to make them regular. And then the architect came along and said, no, it's supposed to look irregular. And so after that, everything takes on this organic, irregular look. And here's the inside of the building. You've got the big glazed north window behind you with this photograph, but it shows these industrial-like spaces, raw spaces, which are the kind of spaces that modern artists work in and that Joe Biondo brought to us with this building. Back on campus, the addition to Skillman Library, I'd wanted on campus, speaking of glazing, a glass curtain wall for a long time. And so he took the 63 building, the Vincent Kling building, the old library, and used what was then fairly limited funds and used them very well to create a whole new facade and a whole new use for this building. So the 63 building, which was not a very attractive building, is sort of log behind it. That's where the stack area is here. And what Joe put in front was this glass curtain wall. So this is the modern glass curtain wall, invented in 1920s in Europe, brought to this country by European immigrants on 1940s. They were fleeing the Nazis. And it's Einsteinian. It says that the wall is no longer a solid barrier. It's permeable, where space and time and light pass through the wall of a building. It's a modern way of looking at architecture. As I say, started in the 1920s, and Joe picks up on that. The style was called the International style. One thing that's said about it was that style could be rather cold. Joe, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Joe. This was done by Bob Miklos, and I'm kind of still back with Biondo. Bob Miklos, he worked for NBay, another Boston firm. And Miklos, what Miklos did with this is he warmed the building psychologically and physically with regional stone, with the tinted glass, with the use of copper. So all of this, and natural wood on the inside, all of this gives the building a kind of warmth that was perhaps missing from the 1920s and 30s international style architecture. architecture. And so, and the building contains the technology elements, lecture halls, reading halls, major functions for the building. Bauhaus in Germany. This was the glass curtain wall building that broke through this style, done by Walter Gropius between 1925 and 1926. So when Joe builds his building, his addition, when Bob Mickler builds his building addition to that, to the Skillman Library, he's thinking back to the Bauhaus and back to the international style tradition. There it is at night. I love to walk the campus at night and see the students up there chatting or working. It's truly a centerpiece for the college, as a library should be. And then sort of ending up here with the Rockwell Center and our most recent building. This was done by ConnectED Architects out of Boston again, with Chris Tomlick, with Mark Oldham doing the major work on it. The building, I think on the outside, tries to merge with the existing architecture. Mark did that. And also modern, I think there's a little bit of the Williams Art Center in here, the way that it arches out, the way it uses its glazing. So it tries to meld in and to be modern at the same time. It also works in scale because of course the building goes down the side of the hill, 5 or 6 floors down the hill, but merges with the scale of the architecture on the top of the hill. I think the entrance is good. I think where the building really comes alive is on the interior. Mark called this the living room, and it's this series of biomorphic shapes which run through 5 floors of the building, and curvilinear, and you literally read the students doing all sorts of things, everything from studying to going and coming to their classes. In the 2 wings of the building, one's more theoretical and the other's more practical. And you see the whole building as a unit. This idea of this more organic shaped architecture, well, it harkens back to some designs that were done in the 1940s, but really what makes it possible is computer aided design. Computers design easily these elaborate curvilinear forms in all sorts of variations. And so a number of contemporary architects, Frank Gehry being one, Zaha Hadid being another, have based their architecture on these curvilinear forms, and Mark and Payette picks up on this sort of design, which I think to me makes sense that biology's housed here. So it's got an organic quality like biology. And I love the fact that these kind of this pod furniture that they have, again, looks like a revival of the 40s on one level, but mixes with the rest of the building. So there we are. I didn't run over too much given the time to set up. And we have, looking at this great history of Lafayette architecture, 150 years of really a great tradition and some very, very notable, exceptional buildings. So thank you all for being here and taking your time and being part of this. And I guess we have a chance for questions. I'll try to answer or comments if a few people want to send in some comments.
Yeah, Bob, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I have a couple of questions that came in through the chat, and I'm monitoring them as they come in as well. Our first question was specifically about the history of Hogue Hall and the YMCA. Do you have any information about the connection there?
Yeah, it functioned as an on-campus YMCA, and I forgot to mention, of course, the YMCA is written directly over the door and the blind arch over the door, and it functioned as an on-campus YMCA during one of its periods. And I have to say, I can't remember off the top of my head what the years were. I think I put them in that little catalog I wrote, but I don't think I can remember the years off the top of my head. But that was, and it had, I mean, when it was a student center, it had a bowling alley in the basement. It had a trophy room. And of course, it had a theater in it, which was used until, the 1980s. And the chapel, of course, which remained. So it had a multifunction use after the Brainerd Society came and went. Yeah, so.
Another question that we had was, did you have any input personally on the planning of Farallon?
No, I did not.
Okay.
That was really done, when I was fairly new here and I didn't have much. The one that I did have some input in was the addition that Bob Miklos did to Skillman Library, and that was done with an architectural competition. And Lafayette doesn't usually do architectural competitions. They take time, they're expensive, but I think you get a better building and it's certainly more interesting for the people on the jury and the architects, because they get to see each other's work. You're trading off against, you're learning from each other over several presentations, and so that's one I did have some input on with the design, but not with Farino.
We had questions about Colton Chapel and South College. Do you have any information about either of those?
Yeah, well, Colton Chapel, I thought about including, and we just ran over a little anyway, and certainly with the students I do. Colton Chapel is also part of the Beaux-Arts tradition, the classical revival. It's done again by very important architects. They're Carey and Hastings. They did the New York Public Library. They on many other buildings, and they were one of the key figures to bring that Beaux-Arts architecture to America. It's full of references, classical references, starting right away with being round. You're picking up on the great round buildings in classical history, the Pantheon, the domes over St. Peter's, the central space at St. Peter's, that kind of thing. Those are very grand examples. But and apparently it was that Mrs. Colton was skeptical when she saw the plans of having a round Presbyterian church. So they sent a Presbyterian minister to speak to her to assure that it was okay to have a round Presbyterian church. But the steeple of that church is right out of Christopher Wren's steeple book. Wren designed 42 steeples in London after the Great Fire. Only 14 remain. They were lost in the Blitzkrieg. But anyway, he did a whole book of steeples, and that's out of that book. Also, the window that faces to the north-south, to the west side, facing towards Van Wickle, is right out of Palladio. It's, in fact, that type of window is known as a Palladian window. So it's got lots and lots of, and in the columns, it's got lots of classical references. So that's there. I think I have less to say about South College. I haven't really studied it. It's so embedded in sort of later editions that I can't do as well with that.
We'll do maybe one or two more questions to run it to the 9 o'clock hour. Another question was, do you have any comments on fraternity architecture, on the fraternity houses?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the buildings that were fraternity houses and are very, very wonderful buildings. A number of them are done in Georgian style, the ones that are close to that have been turned into college buildings. The history center and the Center for Learning are done wonderful Georgian style buildings, combining brick with sort of early federal style, sort of a combination of the two. That they're great. What's down in Zate? It's down the hill, right? Yeah. Zate is a more Victorian building. That too is an excellent building. So yeah, they were very fine buildings that are there. Yeah, and
Got a question.
DU was, I mean, this is a long issue. DU, of course, I thought was a very fine building too, and I think it's very unfortunate that was torn down without any consultation, below the very high administrative level. It was and done without very much warning. I think that was a really unfortunate thing from my personal point of view.
We had a question about, does the college have a commitment to maintaining the integrity of the buildings and their history when they need restoring? Yeah,
it does. I've been on a couple of different committees involved with that, and there are long range and short range plans that are made to really care for these buildings. And I have to say, we've I think always been pretty good to our buildings, but we've gotten a lot better. The McKelvey House was a shambles when I first came here, and we've done that. But on campus, we're watching very carefully the aging of these buildings, and I think their historical integrity. And yeah, I think the college it's very, very careful with that. Yeah.
And along those lines, I think we'll wrap it up with the last question. Is there anything on campus on the National Registry of Historic Places?
It's a good question. I don't think so. Actually, it's something I should know, but I don't think so. And I'm not sure that we've applied. It's a good question. I'll try to find out about that, but it's a really good question. Certainly there are buildings, you know, that have a great deal of history that I think deserve to be in, you know, in at least in that ballpark. Things like Party Hall, a lot of the ones I covered, Colton Chapel, you know, they're important buildings, and Kirby certainly, but I don't think they are as far as I know.
Well, I think that brings us to the 9 o'clock hour. Bob, thank you so very much.
Good. Well, good. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for asking me. Thank you very much for all of you for sharing this with me. It was really fun. I'm getting used to this online teaching. We'll have to see how it goes in the fall. I'd much rather be in a room with you, but it's really great you were here, and I really appreciate your interest. And I look forward to seeing you soon on campus. This will end, and we'll all be on campus together soon. Okay, so have a good evening.
We'd like to thank everybody for joining us. Thank you so much. Check out Leopard Link for our next ConnectED series. We have a couple of additional talks that are scheduled coming soon, including some things about career services as well. So take a look at leopardlink.lafayette.edu, and we look forward to seeing you at our next ConnectED.
Can I say one more word?
Absolutely.
Yes. I have my trusty researcher here, my wife Liza, who's immediately on the computer, and it turns out that Zeta Psi is on the National Historic Register. So there we go.
And with that, have a great night, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.